Okay, well, welcome Literary Globe members, community members, to the Rijksmuseum here in Amsterdam. And we are reporting today with Antjie Krog. And this is one of my literary heroes. And Antjie is a poetry as well as a prose writer. And you've come all the way from South Africa, Cape Town, to attend the Rijksmuseum. And there's a symposium between the Rijksmuseum or the Netherlands and South Africa. Antjie, tell us a bit about this.
Well, this exhibition is overwhelming in many ways.
Yes.
I mean, you realize that colonialism was terrible, you know that it did a lot of wrong things, but to see it spaced out like this in different venues.
It's amazing.
And then the dedication behind the detail, the sophistication about how you oppress, how you exploit,
Yes.
is really telling a terrible story. I know that there's criticism that there's not a black voice present
At the exhibition?
At the exhibition itself, which is true. At the same time, I think the horror is precisely because of the absence of that voice.
Yes, that's a good summary, I think, because that does reflect what we have experienced as a South African as well during the apartheid years. But our literary readers are interested in you as well. Can you tell us about your life as a writer? When did you start as a child? How old were you when you started?
Yeah. Very young, too young, perhaps.
Too young?
I bought little notebooks, empty notebooks, and then kept a diary.
Yes.
Since I could write, I had a diary. And at one stage, my grandmother died, and I wrote about the funeral. And because I didn't cry during the funeral, my mother cried, and family cried, but I didn't cry. And a month afterwards, you read back in the diary, and I read about the funeral, and I cried. And then I realized perhaps something of the power of writing, that it can preserve and it can move you.
Yes. Because your poetry is incredible. I was listening to, in January of last year, in 2015, you read your poetry at a conference here in Amsterdam, and it was just beautiful. Very African. I could hear your passion for South Africa enormously in your poetry. It was beautiful. It's quite a calling. I assume that you've always wanted to be a poet ever since. There's been no other option for you. There's no career change. There is no, this is your first.
Yeah, they say, poets are born. So I would like actually to do something perhaps more lucrative, because few poets can live from what they are writing. But the whole way of reading one's work is something that I was in a way forced into by fellow South Africans, by black South Africans, that to be a poet on the page is enormously elitist and perhaps selfish, and that you ought to be able to read in a way that touch an audience.
Well, you certainly touched me when I was listening to it. So I have a last question for our community. Do you have any advice for aspiring poets? Is there the one thing that joining a critique group, or is there anything that you can actually advise our budding writers that you would recommend?
Well, read. But there's a good reason for that.
Yes.
It's to forge your voice from the other voices. Because you can have something very important to say, but you are saying it in the way that has been done, or poets have used that way of expression a decade or two ago.
Right.
And then you also read to determine your own tiny gap, because you must be able to determine. There's lots of love poetry in the world, but this kind, or the way in which I do it, is quite different. But here is that gap. If you don't read, you are not aware of that gap.
Yes. And that
So and that's why it's so difficult to write in English, because it's such a vast.
It is vast.
Yeah.
It's a vast.
Yeah.
I agree, absolutely. Well, that's it. We would like to thank you for joining our flogging experience.
Pleasure.
Okay, thanks, Antjie.
Thank you.
All right, that's us.